I'm going to start with a step back and look at the Mariners offseason. Maybe it sounds stupid for me to say I'm surprised they haven't made more moves. Maybe I shouldn't be surprised at all, but I am a little bit that there weren't even some smaller trades engineered. Are you surprised with the lack of activity from the front office?
I am. Jerry Dipoto is one of the more creative, executives in baseball, and we're looking at a situation with payroll where it kind of requires, taking a risk, making a trade with your farm system, and some creativity. Maybe getting a third team involved, make a small deal, then turn around and flip that around, and make a larger deal. And to be honest with you, I'm not as sure as some seem to be that they're done. I think if you're Seattle in the situation you're in, you have to be open until opening day and beyond. I mean, teams generally don't make significant trades after opening day, but sometimes in March, certainly in February, we're just early in February. Sometimes even in March, after the Cactus League gets going, you'll see a significant player get moved. And if you're Seattle, you want to be involved in that if you can.
Is there a move that in recent years you can think of that kind of went down that way? You got into spring training and all that good stuff, and a big move was made?
Yeah, it's happened. This year is a little bit different. It's been a little bit strange across the board, and not just with Seattle, but we still have significant free agents that haven't signed. I mean, Alex Bregman's still out there. Jack Flaherty just signed. Pete Alonso's still out there. I think things are shifting because we're seeing a lot of clubs. To be honest with you, like as much as I hate it, I'm trying to sit around thinking about ways to change some regulations, change some rules, change the cadence of the offseason. Like, I get it. Like, I'm not a big fan of Pete Alonso. I mean, I know a lot of Mariners fans are like, hey, get Pete Alonso, get Pete Alonso. Sure, in a vacuum, get Pete Alonso, but that's not a guy you want to throw 6 and 150 at, and Alex Bregman, everybody's all over Alex Bregman. Oh, he's perfect. Seattle needs a third baseman, at least until the Jorge Polanco deal. Go get Alex Bregman. We're talking about a guy who in Houston hit 260, the 315 OBP at age 31 last year. That's not a guy you want to throw $200 million at, is it? I mean, there has to be a limit somewhere, and I think the league is telling us, hey, these guys, the asking price for these guys isn't really fitting, isn't really working right now. So I'm certainly not surprised by that, considering which players are still out there. But it's pretty late, and we've been seeing that more in recent seasons, and it's really interesting. I did not think Alex Bregman and Pete Alonso will still be out there, but they are. And I think we're going to see some dominoes fall once those players sign as well. I mean, depending on where they go. I mean, we've talked a lot about what happens if Bregman goes to Boston. Does that free up someone? Does that push Devers to first? Does that make Tristan Cases available? If he goes to Detroit, what does that do with Matt Vierling or one of their young Major League ready prospects? And those things are still possible. Those things are absolutely plausible in February and even through March as we get closer to opening day. So I'm surprised Seattle hasn't made more moves. There hasn't been more creativity. And to be honest with you, like I don't love that the appearance right now. The optic here is we can't spend a lot of money, so we're hoarding prospects. When we could maybe just throw in that extra guy, maybe throw in that third top 15 prospect and get a player we really like. That's the optic, at least right now. I don't like that at all.
Okay, so follow-up question for that. Jason, I've been wondering, are prospects just not as valuable with trades? Have teams had to include more? Because I'm with you. I've also been like, why not include a few? I mean, you've built up this farm system once again. Do you think it's just that it's harder to do with prospects in today's game?
I think it's harder than 5-10 years ago, particularly with the extra wild card. There are teams out there that think, hey, I mean, it really comes down to dollars. Comes down to the Cincinnatis and the Oaklands and now the Athletics and no Oakland, but Miami and Cincinnati and Pittsburgh and, teams like that, even Colorado. The longer they can kind of, I'm going to use the word fool, although that's not fair in every market. We want to sell tickets, right? We don't want to just sell tickets for opening day and bobblehead nights. We want our team to be interesting as long as possible. If we trade you our good players in the offseason, that reduces, the appeal to fans. And that happens at the trade deadline too. We're seeing fewer bigger players being traded at the deadline. Not none, not zero. Seattle did a pretty good job at the deadline this year, picking up Randy Rosarini, who's obviously key to this upcoming season. But so there are fewer teams just sending away players, proven players to get prospects, but there's still players to be had. So yeah, the price has changed a little bit versus the last 5 to 10 years, but the price is the price. And at some point, your farm system has to help you at the big league level. And if you're just going to sit around, I'm not saying they're doing this, But it looks like they're just going to sit around and wait for the Cole Youngs and the Harry Fords and the Emersons to get to the big leagues to help them, rather than going out and making a significant trade. Teams are interested in Cole Young. Teams are interested in Harry Ford. But you might have to pay 125 cents on the dollar to get a player you really want. You don't really want to go out and continue to make those one-year deals. You don't want to make the one-year deal for Josh Naylor and then a year from now have to go pay that price again because you only had him for 1 year to begin with. There are a lot of those one-year deals out there that I didn't really love, except at some point, something's got to give. At some point, you have to pay the price to get players on your big league roster, so you don't have to go down and maybe pay even more at the trade deadline, and that's the disappointing thing this offseason.
Yeah, anyway. I think the patient game is a dangerous one, especially in baseball, man. You're banking on this 19-year-old to pan out and be one of the greats. Well, we know that proven talent
in 3 years, too, right? In
right.
3 years, that 19-year-old's not helping you right now at all at the big league level.
Exactly. It's a dangerous game to me, and I don't understand why they keep playing this game. But I want to ask you about the Polanco signing, right? You sign him, you bring him back. Stacy and I were talking about how they're putting out there last year he was dealing with an injury. I think it was his knee. Is that what it was, Stacy? His knee was jacked up, and that messed up his performance. And me being an athlete, I put out there, look, or the former athlete, I should say. I'm old now. But I put out there, I'm like, look, that does affect your performance, but is it enough to expect just this monumental jump from him? Like, what'd you think of the deal, and what are your expectations for Polanco?
I'm okay with that deal in a vacuum, but when that's your big deal of the winter, you haven't done much. I think the whole key to that conversation is, and it kind of goes back to what we were just talking about, they haven't been willing to spend the freight to go get the guys. They don't have the money to do it necessarily. 15 to 20 million, as far as we know. That's the thing, too. We don't really know exactly what that number is. And when you go out and kind of avoid using your farm system, you end up with Donovan, Solano and Jorge Polanco. You're kind of the same team you were when the season ended now, for the most part, minus Justin Turner. So you look at Polanco in a vacuum. Sure, it could have been the injuries. It was a hamstring, it was a knee, it was mostly the knee. And you need your legs to hit. You have to have your legs to hit, whether it's your drive leg or your plant leg. Either way, you need your legs to hit. When you're talking about guys, we saw Albert Pujols really early on in his years with the Angels start to have leg and foot injuries, and you saw what happened really fast. He went from one of the best hitters we've ever seen to somebody you could get out in 10 different ways, and that was Polanco a year ago. The problem I have with Polanco just individually is this might be a trend. He went from 21% strikeout rate to 25% strikeout rate to 29% strikeout rate. The walks went down 3 years in a row. The batting average went down 3 years in a row. He's been hurt all three of those seasons, 22, 23, and 24. And you're sitting on a team here that has a good pitching staff, a very good pitching staff, a solid bullpen coming back with some upside. You're hoping Julio takes off. You're hoping he found it last year. Victor Robles for the whole season, Randy Rosarina for the whole season. And Donovan Solano and Jorge Polanco is the best you could do at this point. Like, that front office is restricted. They have limits, and it's really difficult to maneuver when you don't have money to spend, really, and you have 3 or 4 holes to fill, and players don't really want to come here anyway. Like, if you have an opportunity to engage with a free agent from a payroll standpoint, but that player doesn't really want to play here for obvious reasons, the travel, the weather, it's hard to hit in the ballpark, and we know all those things are nightmares. It makes it that much more difficult to get players to come here. So they end up with Jorge Polanco. But there's kind of a bigger picture conversation, and I just wrote about this the other day, that we're not really talking about, and that is Randy Rosarina and Victor Robles. You had Robles for roughly half a season last year and less than half a season as a starter. You had Randy Rosarina for 2 months last year. What if I told you you could go back in time and have those two players to start the season? Everything else is the same performance-wise, but you had those two players to start the season. How differently do you think that the season goes? Forget about thinking about runs scored and all that stuff. How differently does the season go? Do they win a couple extra games probably? And that changes everything with this club the last 3 or 4 years, doesn't it? You win a couple more games, the end of the season looks a lot different than it does. So if you're looking for something to be optimistic about, that's what I would look at. You added 2 players that are going to bat in the top 5 of your order that you're going to have all year that you didn't have last year.
So that has to be what ownership is thinking.
Oh, yeah.
That's it right there. I mean, running back, but we're going to have longer to kind of let this team develop.
And I don't even think that, I don't think that Jorge Polanco was the Mariners and Jerry DiPoto's plan A. But I also think that counting on a lot of these guys was. Even if they wanted to add different free agents or there were a couple other trades that they wanted to move, I'm sure that Jerry would love more money, just as every GM would. I still think he strikes me, Jason, as someone who truly fundamentally believes in his approach to team building. And I'm sure he looks at a lot of the pieces and says, forget what you guys saw last year. That's not what's really here. I do think he believes that. Is that what you think?
Yeah, I mean, you have to believe that. I mean, it's rational to believe that. But I don't think that is the reason why Donovan Solano and Jorge Polanco are all you can do this winter. It very much comes about payroll. And it's really not about free agency to me either. I look at this club every year and I see, okay, maybe they have X amount to spend, X amount. Even if you told me they had $60 million to add to this year's payroll, and I'm thinking, who's going to take it? Who's going to take it? So then you're talking about, okay, just pay the player more, pay the T-Mobile tax, pay the travel tax, pay the Mariner tax, and get him. Well, if we're talking about a 5-year deal on a free agent, what is that tax? Because $5 to $8 million isn't going to be enough. $5 to $8 million a year maybe, and now all of a sudden your payroll's busted for years because you have to pay the T-Mobile tax. So it's really all about, even when you have a payroll available, it's primarily, not even just primarily, it's almost exclusively going to be about, hey, what trades can we make for players that are making some money? They might already be making $8-10 million. It might be a Randy Rosarina situation where he's got a couple years arbitration left where he's making $8-10 million this year, 12 to 15 next year, and he might make even more than that the year after that. And we'll decide in free agency if we want to try to keep him. That's really always going to be the situation in Seattle with free agency. There's nothing they can do over at that ballpark besides put a freaking dome, a true dome on top of that thing. And fix everything that way. That there's really nothing else to do over there. That's it. This is going to be an extreme pitcher's ballpark forever, unfortunately, which is kind of funny because the Kingdom was the exact opposite, and folks complained about that too. Lou Piniella was one of them. He had his coded complaints about that ballpark where you just get the ball in the air and it's a home run. And now we're the exact. Somebody asked me a question yesterday. Would you rather have an extreme hitter's park, an extreme pitcher's park, or a neutral ballpark? And you look around, and I don't know if there's any direct correlation to this, but the teams that have the neutral sites, the environments that are pretty neutral going in both directions, are winning a lot. The Rangers won the World Series. The Astros have won World Series. The Dodgers, the Cardinals. I don't know if there's any direct correlation. That's a good research project for somebody not named Churchill, but it's really interesting that maybe it's a little bit easier to build your team when your ballpark isn't a problem.
Let's tear down and rebuild it, Church. Let's do it.
How about you do that and I'll write about it?
I like it. Investors, holla at me. I got a business plan for this. Hey man, last one for me. We talked about. I love what you mentioned about. Hey, imagine having a Rosarina for a full year, and does he help win more ball games? The biggest piece of this thing, other than the arms, is Julio Rodriguez, right? Like, how important is it that he gets off to that start, and how much pressure do you think is on him? And I guess one more question, if you can handle it, I guess. How patient do you think this team will be with him, and how patient should fans be?
Yeah, I mean, we're talking about a guy who's, 24 years old?
Yeah.
I mean, this isn't a guy you're going to be impatient with. He's signed for the next 1,000 years. He's not going anywhere. We've seen what he can do. It would be nice for him not to struggle early in the season because, that cold weather, some guys are going to struggle. You need your best player. But I'm glad you brought up Julio because – when the offseason started, it was like, hey, what are the Mariners' chances of adding a star? Their best chance to add a star is to get Julio to be Julio and for him to take another step forward and maybe do something a little bit like what Bobby Witt Jr. did a year ago in Kansas City and have a legitimate MVP season. That is their best chance to add a star to this club, is for Julio just to continue to do what we know he's capable of doing. I mean, you look, I use the stat WRC plus quite a bit. He's taken a dive 2 years in a row, and he was, he's really good in the 140s his rookie year. He jumped down to the high 120s in year two, and he was 116 a year ago, and it took a really good finish, a great finish for him to get there. They need him to be, a consistent, legitimate, middle of the order type bat. And I think consistency is probably the key, because we at the end of the year, we look at numbers and it's like, oh, they had a pretty decent season. Oh, like if you look at the Mariners' first base numbers last year, oh, they had a pretty decent season at first base. Yeah, but it was so up and down, so peaks and valleys, and just you need that consistency. In fact, a lot of folks, look at where Seattle was last year offensively in the most important metrics and compare them to the Cleveland Guardians. Seattle was every bit as good offensively as the Cleveland Guardians in almost every area, especially when you consider the ballpark that is going to suppress some of those runs scored a little bit. And yet the Guardians were significantly better club on the field because they were consistent. It wasn't, score 8 runs on Tuesday and then Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, you combine for 8. And Seattle has done that a lot the last 2 or 3 years. So getting Julio off to a pretty decent start and being consistent as a group, I think, is the key to the season.